Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here with another Civilization overview. Today we're going to be doing everyone's favorite doomsday prophets, the Mayans. Now, as you may have heard, they're pretty well regarded as being one of the strongest civilizations in the game, and we're going to look at the reasons for that in this video. They were a very highly requested civilization, but so were the Incas, and that tempted me for a moment to put the two together, maybe even with the Aztecs in there, and make a Mesoamerican civ overview. But I decided against doing that because they really are three different civilizations with three very different tech trees, and they have to be looked at individually. So with that, let's take a look. First, let's look at the Mayans team bonus. It's a rare slip-up, but actually Age of Empires messes up a little bit, and their minus 50% wall cost is actually minus 40%. That's because the walls go from 5 stone to 3, and even if you make a long line of them, it still counts 3 stone for each of those. This used to be one of my favorite team bonuses when I started playing, and I'd always get a Mayan AI teammate against the computer in my early Age of Empires days back when Pluto was a planet and Roy Halladay pitched for the Toronto Blue Jays. Ah, the good old days. Remember back in the day? Yeah, that's enough of that. Of course, I've become a little bit less intense about building walls in my old age, and I'm not quite as enamored with the bonus as I was, but it's still interesting, and it helps your team wall up on open maps. I'm a little confused as to why the Mayans specifically got the bonus, as I didn't realize they built a whole lot of walls, but it's Age of Empires after all, and we have to pick our battles about this sort of thing. Moving on to the Mayan civ bonuses. They start with an extra villager, but minus 50 food. Fair trade? Well, not if you believe my video that villagers are worth more in the Dark Age. One balance in the game is that you start population blocked and can't make another villager until you put down a house. This means it only makes sense to begin the game with loom, while other civilizations are technically making their first villager. That means that when your loom finishes, other civilizations will have 4 villagers and so will you. That doesn't mean you lose the advantage though, since you'll be back to 1 ahead of them once they research loom. Assuming all things equal, you'll actually keep that 1 villager advantage until you stop constant production, so it can add up to a noticeable advantage. That means you can advance a little bit faster or go up with an extra villager at the same time. With loom right away, you're also less likely to die to a boar or get a villager picked off by an early scout, which can make your starts more consistent. Being 1 villager ahead of your opponent also adds up fast, and 5 minutes in-game of chopping can get you approximately 200 wood. It's a cool eco boost. The next bonus is that their resources last 20% longer, which is fantastic, but a lot of people don't know what this means at first. Basically, you have a bonus 800 gold block for every 5 gold squares that you have. You just can't see it. Obviously, you still have to mine it, but it means you can get one location safe with towers, walls, etc., and exploit it for longer. As your villager collects, their amount goes up at a rate indistinguishable from the normal collection rate, but the resource you're collecting from goes down 20% slower. So you collect 10 resources, and if you check back, only 8 are missing. It feels like it's breaking the law of conservation of mass somehow, and it's a bit confusing to wrap your head around at first. Everybody gets a little shocked when they finally realize what's going on, and it's pretty cool. This is a great bonus because it helps you out at every age. In the Dark Age, you get more out of the sheep and boar, which are obviously faster food sources, and can offset a bad start, say if you're missing a sheep or a boar for any reason, because your sheep functionally have more food than usual. Although bear in mind the decay rate is the same, so it's not exactly like the sheep had 120 food. Trees functionally do have 120 wood in them for Mayans instead of 100, so you have to refresh your lumber camps less often, and we all know from my earlier video how important that is. In that video, I concluded that when the wood line is about 4 tiles away from the lumber camp, you should build a new one. If you're getting more wood from the trees, then it's going to take you longer to reach that point. As well, your gold and stone piles last longer, so you spend less time moving villagers between them, and you get more in the end for the mines that you have. Just make sure you're also claiming those mines in the open map, or your opponent might run out in their home mines first, and then claim the others on the map while you're still happily mining at home. I hope you're starting to see, if you didn't already, that this bonus pays off for your economy in a lot of tiny ways that add up over the game. It's not on the same level as a 20% collection rate or anything like that. That would be insane. But this is the next best thing. Their third civ bonus is that archers are cheaper by 10% in feudal, 20% in castle, and 30% in imperial. That's an awesome bonus. The archer line in feudal age is 23 wood and 41 gold. In castle age, it's 20 wood and 36 gold, and in imperial, the arbalest is 18 wood and 32 gold. Everyone else is paying 25 wood and 45 gold for the same unit. Crazy, hey? And people say Britons are the archer civ. Their unique unit is the plumed archer. I'm just kidding, it's pronounced the plumed archer, you know, like feather plumes. There is no chance at all that up until this year I've been pronouncing it the plumed archer. I don't know why you'd even think that. I mean, like what, plums? Like they're shooting plums? Or they are plums? That doesn't make any sense. Seriously though, someone should make a mod to replace the plumed archer with the plumed archer, which just shoots plums or has a plum for a head. I would be eternally grateful for that mod. In fact, I would probably give the person that made it my cat. And I'd even sign her. Okay, so while someone is off working on that, I had a test I wanted to run. Who do you think would win one-on-one, the elite longbowman or the elite plumed archer? Even if we start them with the plumed archer out of range and having the longbowman get an extra shot in, the plumed archer still wins. Now, I'm not saying the plumed archer is a replacement for the longbow, which can snipe onagers and back up an army with 12 range, but it's pretty notable that the plumed archer ends up winning, especially since it costs 32 wood and gold versus 35 wood and 40 gold for the longbow. But everybody says longbows are only good when they're above a critical mass, so let's do 40 longbows versus 40 plumed archers. As you can see, the plumed archers still win. Pretty good, hey? The Mayan unique tech increases Eagle Warrior HP by 40. That puts their Eagle Warriors up to 100 health points. Now that's not crazy since Paladins do get up to 192 health points with the Franks and have a higher attack, which highlights how weak Eagle Warriors normally are. One thing they have going for them is their really high Pierce armor though, and we'll take a look at their utility as infantry in the infantry part of the overview. Now let's look at the Forgotten Empire's changes. Not surprisingly, the Mayans got their archery claws trimmed a little bit, similar to with the Huns and their cavalry archer cost. The new technology, Obsidian Arrow, gives archers +3 attack versus building. Now, unlike what you may have heard, this does not affect plumed archers. Instead, the plumed archers get a hidden change that I just about missed, and their cost actually goes up to 50 wood and 50 gold. After you factor in the cheaper archers in Imperial Age, that's 36 wood and 36 gold. If anything, it seems like these changes are meant to make the arbalest line a little bit more tempting, to give the arbalest some kind of edge on the cheaper and stronger plumed archer. Arbalests are 17 wood and 32 gold for reference, although keep in mind arbalests are slower, their HP is 40 instead of 65, and they have less pierce armor. Still, it's enough to give you pause when you're thinking about which one to pick. I feel like I've already been talking about them quite a bit, but let's take a look at the Mayan archery range as a whole. To be honest, it's not quite as nuts as it might have sounded up to this point, and it's missing a lot. No hand cannoneer or cavalry archers, obviously, because no cavalry of any kind. This puts the Mayans in the difficult, really good at one thing but not strategically flexible category. And traditionally, I don't favor that as much. Civilizations like that make you a bit more predictable, which, to be fair, may not matter if nobody can handle the strategy you're using. That's kind of how I feel about the Mayan archers, and their plumed archers are pretty tough to handle in the Castle Age, even if you know they're coming. It's just too early in the game to have enough mangonels, rams, and skirmishers to keep them under control, unless you're way better or something, in which case it doesn't matter what civ anybody is. Even in the Forgotten Empire's expansion, the plumed archers are still really cheap, and their stats are exceptional for archery range units. If we throw it in the mix with the rest of the archery range, I can really overlook all the X's in the tech tree. Put it this way, you probably wouldn't be building cavalry archers, even if you had them. A plumed archer is less than half the gold cost of a cavalry archer and works about as well. It's an A+ from me for the archers. Mayans versus Britons for better archers is a seriously hot debate that I'm not going to get into right now, and it would need its own video to settle. I'll just be diplomatic and say they're both great. Now let's take a look at the infantry. Looking at the usual infantry units, the spear line is solid, and the swordsman line is a bit below average since it's missing the champion. They're the first civ I've covered that has the Eagle Warrior though, which means it's a good time to take a look at it. If I had to compare the Eagle Warrior to something in terms of base stats, it's roughly the same as a knight without bloodlines. 100 HP, 9 compared to 10 attack, and 4 base armor in total. The Eagle Warrior doesn't function exactly like a knight though, because it doesn't have any weakness to spears, and its armor leans more toward pierce than melee. That makes it a bit better at raiding towns, and a bit weaker in combat on the field against infantry. There's a couple of bonuses I want to point out about it though. First of all, unlike the knight, they have a great line of sight. They're the Mayans version of a scout cavalry with Huscarl-like attributes mixed in there as well. Speaking for the elite eagles, they also get a slight bonus to cavalry. It looks like it's about 4 extra damage, which means functionally they're a bit better than you would expect looking at their numbers, but they're not a replacement for halberdiers against cavalry by any means. They also have a bonus versus siege of +5 and do +10 damage against monks, combined also with natural conversion resistance. This means their strengths are against siege, archers, monks, and their weaknesses are against anti-infantry units like the hand cannoneer, other infantry, and strong cavalry like the paladin. In the HD version, advancing through the ages gives an attack bonus to the Eagle Warriors, and that goes away when you go up to elite. Forgotten Empires, on the other hand, uses Eagle Scouts instead, which have the same stats as the Eagle Warrior in the old Age of Empires games right at the beginning. The difference is that the increased attack that used to be automatic as you age up has now turned into an upgrade that costs 200 food and 300 gold. I really don't mind the idea though, especially because the Eagle Warrior is stronger than the Scout Cavalry that other civs start with, and I really like the idea of adding new skins into the game anywhere we can. The drawback of Eagle Warriors is the gold cost, and as well, they have the big weakness to other infantry units, especially the swordsman line. One could argue the Mayans compensate for this with the cheap archers, which generally counteract infantry pretty well. And you could argue that the cheap archers and the strong economy together offset the cost of the Eagle Warrior too. That was probably more info about the Eagle Warrior than we needed for this overview, but like I said, it's the first time they've come up. Going back to the big picture for Mayan infantry, I would give them a B. I guess my impression is that they're beaten by every other infantry civilization by quite a bit, but they do have the basics, and the Eagle Warrior has a place in the game for sure. The Eagle Warrior really hits its stride in the late game when it's raiding trade and town centers, especially after that +40 HP tech, of course. So normally we'd be doing cavalry next, but there is no cavalry, of course. We could make the argument that the Eagle Warrior should go here because it moves fast, but it's not really the same, and it's technically infantry. So we'll just leave it as not applicable. Okay, now let's take a look at Siege. The key techs missing are Siege Engineers, Siege Onager, and the Bombard Cannon. The missing Siege Onager isn't a big deal, as it's a very expensive upgrade and usually isn't worth getting except to cut down trees in the HD version. In the Forgotten Empires expansion, you don't need the Siege Onager to do that, making it even less useful. The lack of Bombard Cannon is a minor inconvenience, but it's not a big deal. Missing Siege Engineers, though, does hold back the rest of the siege considerably, so that's a strike against them. With access to all the important siege units and techs, it looks like a run-of-the-mill B+ siege tree to me. That's to say that when you're using it, you have the options you need most of the time, but I wouldn't go trying to fight a siege civilization with your own. Why would you want to anyway with Eagle Warriors? Okay, now let's take a look at the monastery. Well, you probably know my opinion that monks aren't super important, but that being said, it's nice to have redemption as an option. That's the tech that allows you to convert other buildings and siege. I don't see much point at getting monks if you don't have that technology, to be honest, except maybe to collect relics. Heresy and Faith are there if enemy monks are a big problem, which is nice to see. Overall, it's a C for me, because of the lack of any monk bonuses and no redemption. Now let's take a look at the Navy. I don't know about you, but I always find it's a hollow victory on the water when I win it, but I don't have cannon galleons. Let me back up though. Mayans win the water fairly easily against a lot of other civs, with a totally open tech tree and good economy. Like the Huns, they're one of those civs that's good at getting onto the water at the start with a strong eco, and they can defend their fishing ships. Unlike the Huns though, in the late game the Mayans can actually keep kicking other civilizations off the water, maybe even the Japanese. The problem is, even if you win the water as the Mayans, you don't have the cannon galleon, so you can't bombard the shore. A castle on the coast halts your navy dead in the water. You're ultimately forced to land your units, which usually doesn't go well unless it's a sneak attack, so congratulations on winning the water. Prepare for a boring 3-hour game on an island's map. Given the early game strength and late game fizzle, I'd still give them an A- on water, because they can beat a lot of other civilizations on the water. But I have to give it a big asterisk saying, don't pick the Mayans on a 1 vs 1 water map. There's no point in controlling the water if you're just going to try to sneak land units anyway. Now let's take a look at defenses. The Mayan University isn't too shabby. They don't have the Bombard Tower, of course, but it's pretty rare to see online anyway. Cheap archers count a bit towards defense as well, I think. Their buildings have architecture research, heated shot, and the all-important bracer. Sorry to rub it in, Persian fans. I think the Mayans feel like a solid A- to me on defenses. They're a long ways back of the Byzantines, but you should have no problem staying on the defensive for the early game and coming out of it as a powerhouse. There's a few more points I want to make about the Mayan economy as well. First, the 20% more resources makes them way more consistent in the early game, and if you combine that with cheap archers, they get the seemingly unbalanced combo of more resources in and fewer going out. One drawback of their 20% eco bonus is that it actually makes their farms worse in a weird sort of way. Basically, they pick up 1.2 units of resource every time it goes down 1, so their gathering rates had to be brought down in order to balance that out. This isn't really detectable in any way except on farms, where it's generally accepted that they're around 3 to 5% slower at gathering from farms than other civs once you factor in all the walking around on the farm. Keep their slower farm penalty in mind when you count on farms in the Dark Age as part of your build. Looking at the rest of their tech tree, they are missing the last gold mining tech. But if I'm counting the cheap trash as a Byzantine eco bonus, then I have to do the same with the cheap archers for the Mayans. Ultimately, like a good eco-tech, the cheaper archers lets them build the unit for longer in the game. All things considered, I'd give the Mayans an A+ for economy. It's really quite noticeable in the mid-game that you seem to do everything the same and you end up with more resources somehow. That's just how it feels to me. If you're all about booming your economy, you may find the resources are coming in faster than you can use them if you're playing as the Mayans. You can really support a huge army of archers in the late Castle Age and early Imperial Age, for example, and where the archers lack the knockout punch against defenses and buildings, you can always end up supplementing it with siege and eagle warriors a bit later too. I've always been pleasantly surprised by the Mayan economy, and they're definitely one of the best for that in the game. So to wrap up, the Mayans are an economic powerhouse with some, I think, really underrated archers, especially the Arbalest. I can see them being commonly played as a fast castle to archers type of civilization. I can see some comparisons with the Byzantines and that they can serve resources really well, but unlike the Byzantines, I think they're a little bit better at raiding, in my opinion. That being said, the Mayans don't have the Byzantine flexibility, and I find it's pretty hopeless against anti-archer civs like the Goths and Huns. They just don't have an ideal response to cavalry or infantry with high pierce armor, and champions with skirmishers or scorpions is a combo that I have a really hard time countering with the Mayans, except to go with a ton of onagers, which isn't really what the Mayans do best. What I like about the Mayans, besides the economy, is that it feels like, in terms of military, they have something above average that they can do at every point in the game, so you never really feel out of it. I hope you guys found that useful, and if nothing else, it'll give you some ideas about how to play against them or what to do if you land them on random. So thanks guys for watching. It's looking like the Indians or the Franks are up next, with the Incans, Vikings, and the Saracens also pretty highly requested in there. I don't know exactly who it's going to be yet, but stay tuned for that. I've also had an interesting idea brought up that I should do how many villagers on each resource in order to maintain constant production of different units. I think one just on feudal age units is probably a big video in itself, so maybe we'll start with that one. Anyway guys, that's all for now. I'll see you next time.